Hi.
Hi.
I'm Erika Naylor, and
Yeah.
this is my husband.
Anton Naylor.
And
This is our story, and it starts with 12 years ago when we became a family with epilepsy.
My son was born November 10th of 2008. And in January of 2009, I had my very first seizure. I remembered where I was, what I was doing, everything about it, which is strange because going forward, the more seizures I would have, the less and less I would remember. At the time, we had no idea what it was, but we got in to see my doctor right away. I didn't even know how to properly explain what I was going through. I mean, how do you, in words that other people can understand, how do you explain what a seizure is like, especially if you don't have a seizure that's tonic-clonic, or I was just having complex partial seizures. And so when we were put in touch with the first of many doctors, we weren't receiving a lot of answers at all. About 3-4 years in, we finally received a call to go to the Hamilton General Hospital for a long-term EEG in their epilepsy monitoring unit. And I had 2 of them there, and both were inconclusive. There were several varying opinions on what exactly was going on. I had 2 stays, and both of them came out inconclusive. All the while, my seizures kept getting worse and worse. I lost employment because of it. I had to go on disability. There was even a point where we were told by one of the specialists that was working with me that epilepsy was not a reason to write a letter of disability, even though I was having 11 seizures a day on pretty much a normal day. And they kept getting worse. And we were just twisting in the wind. I know that my husband worked with a man named...
Well, at the time I was working at a company, and I met a gentleman by the name of John Steinberg, and he was very active with epilepsy, the epilepsy organization that was at the time being run out of Kitchener-Waterloo. And he was a very big advocate himself, not a sufferer, but he had a friend who was. And basically what he was doing was he started coaching me at the onset as to other options, other people to talk to. And I reached out, I would say around 2015, I reached out to the first time to the Hamilton Halton Epilepsy Group. And that was where I made a brief contact, gave some basic information. I think I talked to a caseworker maybe once for a couple of minutes. And then we were still on our path at that point, and we never really recontacted the epilepsy organization from there. Fast forwarding from there a couple of years, the seizures continued getting worse. They started changing in nature.
This was about 6 or 7 years into the process of just having seizures, epilepsy out of nowhere. I had never in my life had an episode of any kind before that one I had in 2009. And so when he finally met or spoke with John and got in touch with Epilepsy South Central Ontario. And we never followed up. But luckily, Epilepsy South Central Ontario followed up with us.
We had hit, this is coming into 2018. We were coming up on one of the, actually 2017, sorry, we were coming up on one of the lowest points. Her seizures were out of control. We had been through 3 neurologists by this point. We had tried a battery of different medication combinations.
I was starting to see less and less of an end to the torture of having epilepsy and seizures. And I was starting to go into a very dark place mentally. I blamed myself, even though it wasn't my fault, but still there's a certain level of blame that gets put on the shoulders personally. I felt terrible because my husband suddenly worked full-time and was my caretaker. I was disabled. My poor son, I'll never forget the day that I found out that he saw me. I don't remember it, but apparently I had just had a seizure and sort of fell out on the floor, just lost consciousness. And he came running to get you because he thought I had died. And that's something really difficult as a mother. How was I going to help myself and at the same time hold this family together so that they didn't have to feel burdened and I didn't have to feel burdened by the fact that I was burdening them. And when we received the call, my husband, I'll let you tell the story about when the call was received.
She was suffering as much as she was, just like she had related. We had just been told by a neurologist that because they didn't have any good recommendations and because they hadn't seen us in 6 months, they had closed her file. We literally had been cut loose from who we were dealing with at the time. And we were about as deep as we could get. Depression, you name it, it was bad. And I was sitting in my office at my desk and I was working away and my phone rang and it was an unrecognizable number and I picked it up. And it was, I believe her name is Lindsay, and she was an intern working for ESCO. And she had been given the job just to follow up on people that they hadn't heard from in a while. And she said, I've got your name on a list. And this is, like, I've got your name on a list and I'm just following up and seeing. And she got it both barrels for me that day, and not in a bad way, but no one was listening to us. So I related our entire story up to her at that point, right out of the gates. I just told her everything that had happened to us. And she said to me, okay, we have a retreat coming up this weekend in Brantford. The registration is closed, but I can get you guys in if you want to go.
And one of the board members is one of the best epileptologists in Ontario, and he would be happy to speak with you. And when my husband called me and told me that this opportunity had presented itself, there was a sense of relief, a sense of, are we just going to go through it all over again?
Yep.
Like, am I really going to receive help? But it was wonderful. Once we got there, the first thing, we sat down on there was a speaker speaking about women with epilepsy. And suddenly I was seeing patterns and they were explaining patterns and different things. And we were noticing that the epilepsy was definitely following a type of cycle very similar to what they were explaining. So finally, just being in that atmosphere, I felt like I was surrounded by people who understood me for the very first time.
And then we were introduced to Dr. Berkovich, and we gave him a brief rundown of her case and her situation and what we had been through up to this point. And his recommendation.
I said to him, I always say this, but I was so desperate for help that the first thing I said to him when I walked up to him was, if you'll take me on as a patient, I will throw myself at your feet. And what he said back to me was, you don't even need to do that. Just call my office. I'll get you in within 2 months. And he did.
Yep.
And from that moment, it was like, take off. Suddenly, from no movement in years and years to light speed going straight for surgery.
When we had first contacted his office, his assistant told us, we're booking 6 months down the road. He's quite busy. And we're like, okay, well, we've been through it this far. We'll wait 6 months. And this was in September. We get a call back a couple of weeks later. There's a cancellation. We have an opening in October. Can you come in? We went in, we sat down, we met with him. Unlike other neurologists we had dealt with, there was a sense of comfort, compassion, and he knew what he was dealing with. Nothing was a shock to him. He never gave a, oh, that's interesting, or I don't know what that is, or anything like that. He was very understanding all the way. And we immediately felt like we were dealing with someone who knew exactly what we were dealing with. And
no, I just, from the moment that happened, and it just went so fast. I ended up having my
January?
first in January of 2018.
Yes.
I had my first long-term monitoring stay at Toronto Western, and what a wonderful team of neurologists there are there. I can still remember the day they came in and officially told me I had temporal lobe epilepsy.
Yes.
And I started crying, and it was Dr. Wumberg, that's
Yes.
right. He was the one, he did an MEG on me, and I don't know how we got this lucky, but they caught one of my seizures in the MEG, and that was the moment. Dr. Wumberg came into my little area in the hospital ward and said, so yeah, we see very clearly there was a seizure in the right temporal lobe. And I remember crying, and he's looking at me like, why are you crying over this? And I told him, this is the first time anybody has ever said formally, what is wrong with me? And they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of knowing.
Yes. And
having that knowledge meant more to me at that moment than anything else. And if it wasn't for, again, that call from Lindsay, if we hadn't been on that list for her to call that day, I don't know where I'd be right now, because through being connected with Dr. Berkovich and eventually my surgeon and my cat, Dr. Wumberg, who is not my cat, but my a neurologist that worked with me, it was serendipitous. It really was. It was like all the pieces were finally coming together. And I had, in my first EEG, long-term EEG, I met the most wonderful group of people that were also going for like the exploratory, trying to find out what was going on. We all became really good friends and stayed in touch, and we're still supporting each other through, there are still a couple who have not had their surgery yet, no thanks to the pandemic.
No.
But we all stuck together, and also having that friendship meant so much. So, I mean, so far right out of the park, ever since Epilepsy South Central Ontario contacted us, there were just consistent wins. And that was something we had never had this whole time. We were put finally in touch with the right people at the right time that are there specifically to help people like me, to help people like us, because a whole entire family that lives together experiences that epilepsy. I may be the one that is experiencing the actual seizure, but they're the ones that have to watch it and be helpless. And knowing that there's a foundation out there that is looking actively to help people like me so that we don't fall through the cracks anymore. It is one of the greatest gifts ever given to me. Because in record time, within 2 years, I went from having 11 seizures to a day, being medication resistant, not having a reason for why I had epilepsy. There was nothing on my brain showing that in the average MRI that there was anything, any bruising or anything.
They could find no scarring, no brain damage of any kind. They weren't sure exactly how it was happening, so it was a big gray area, but we started getting better information, more information. Even the difference, her first long-term stay at Toronto Western was only 3 days, and they were able to capture 21 events in 3 days.
And that should speak a lot to where I was with my quality of life at that point. If they were able to capture 21 seizures in 3 days,
That was even where we learned that you were having them in your sleep. Up to that point, we didn't even
had
know
no
that.
idea.
Yep.
Up to that point, we also didn't have a lot of resources for information, like about things like SUDEP and all that. We had no idea that there were, oh my goodness, almost 100 or more different types of seizures that people have. Like everybody, it's such a huge area that it doesn't seem like people are talking about enough.
Mm-hmm.
And now, ever since I've been fixed, all I want to do is talk about it and my experience and everything that I've gone through. And I would not be seizure free today if we had never received that call from Lindsay. In a lot of ways, Lindsay saved my life that day. And so did Epilepsy South Central Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
I would not be where I am today if not for their compassion, care, and help. What I'd like to see in the future for people like me and people like my husband and my child, I'd like to see care for caretakers. I'd like to see those roles being seen as just as vital as any role that a doctor or a nurse, or I mean, he's living it with me. And if the caregiver cannot get the support they need, you know, we had our falling down moments. We had moments where the whole family was just at the bottom of
you had lost a career. Then on top of that, you had lost, first your career went out, then you lost just after that, you were just trying to maintain a job and you lost that employment as well. There was a lack of.
My employers were well aware that I had epilepsy.
Yeah.
They were all aware that I was having appointments where I would have 9-day stays in the hospitals, or, you know, and when those stays would come up, I didn't have a choice for when I could go. It wasn't like something that it could be scheduled. When a bed opens up in the epilepsy monitoring unit, you get up and you go.
Yeah.
And I had employers that really gave me a hard time for essentially wanting to heal myself so I could be a better employee, along with being just better everything.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have to feel like I was being held prisoner by my body. Mm-hmm. Because I was. And it's enough to make you feel crazy sometimes when you see in these seizures. Things get distorted. They're scary. There are two types of things, you know, there's deja vu, which everybody knows what deja vu, but then there's jamais vu. And that's something that I dealt with, where familiar things suddenly look unfamiliar, or rather seem unfamiliar and strange and scary. And it was something, it could be something as common as my cat or my dog walking up to me, and I would tell my husband, get them away from me, get them away from me. And that's kind of what he had to deal with as a caretaker as well, were the freakouts and insecurities that I wasn't necessarily in control over, because I was seeing stuff that was stranger than fiction.
Yeah, we had one of the things that we learned as they started to uncover information was that the epicenter for a lot of her seizures lived right near the limbic system. And there was a lot of, whether you would call it crosstalk or anything else, that the kind of like the waves that would go out from the seizure would impact her fear centers, her anxiety. So there was a point where she was literally living with uncontrolled fear and anxiety over literally nothing, and she knew
there were psychologists and therapists and psychiatrists that I was working with, and they were even at a point where they said to me, we don't know how much of this is actually something that we can fix with this therapy, or if it's the seizure activity. We don't know which it is anymore.
Yeah.
Because I had a whole toolbox filled with coping skills. But how can you cope when you have seizure activity literally kicking you in your fear spots all the time? I was in a constant state of fight or flight, and sometimes for no reason at all. Mm-hmm. And having Epilepsy South Central, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, I was suicidal. Mm-hmm. I was. And I feel so bad. I'm not crying for myself here. I'm crying for all the people out there who are in a position like I was. And nobody deserves that. And everybody deserves themselves a Lindsay and an Epilepsy South Central Ontario to pick up a phone and call and just reach out. It made all the difference. And now all I want to do is live my life, letting other people with seizure disorders know that this isn't it. There's more. There is more. And I can't be more grateful to everybody who played a role every step of the way. Okay, here come the tears for real. I'm trying to hold them back. But from Epilepsy South Central Ontario to my husband, definitely my son, all my friends that stuck with me, because another thing that people don't realize is chronically ill people aren't very much fun to be friends with. And I lost a lot of my support network as well. I was hanging by a thread.
When you're in a situation where simple event seizures interrupt everything, whether it be a planned event of going out for the night or a family dinner or even just going out to buy groceries or anything else, and a seizure can shut all of that down and all plans stop. And that happened so many times that it just became normal for us. We just knew.
Just stopped calling, and I can't.
And eventually we stopped making plans. We effectively became a shut-in family. We only left the house when we absolutely had to, under the deepest of circumstances, because being out in public with the chance of her having seizures was an embarrassment that she wasn't willing to bear, and it was an embarrassment I didn't want to put her through.
Because people don't understand the many different ways that a seizure can look like. If you have an absent seizure or a partial seizure, people aren't going to understand what they're looking at, and they're going to think that there's somebody, their mouth might be moving slightly, or just they look completely lost and confused. People don't tend to help and reach out in those cases. I had not once. I actually had a moment in a hospital of all places where I had a seizure
in the lobby, and you had a seizure surrounded by people, and nobody stopped to even ask what was going on, because she was not convulsing, she was not unconscious, she didn't have any of those classic seizure symptoms that we see from movies and TV, that literally people almost were willing to ignore what was happening. It was jarring.
I was right in the middle of a room, a major traffic area, and people, nurses, doctors, actually, finally, it was somebody, I think it was somebody who worked,
She was a patient.
A patient.
She was a patient. The only person that stopped to ask was another patient.
And she asked if we were okay, and she went and got someone for us.
But by that point, the seizure was over.
That's what I think I want most of all, is for people to stop seeing what they can't see doesn't mean that someone's not experiencing that. We can't just, epilepsy cannot be ignored. It needs to be known, because I am certain that there are so many people out there that are suffering from partial seizures, and they don't even know that it's epilepsy, because there's not enough information out there. Once we finally found our way to Epilepsy South Central Ontario, the information available to us, the resources, it became, it was like Wikipedia, but like
it became apparent that there was an entire sea of information that we had never had presented to us, and our own research hadn't even gotten us to it yet.
An entire sea of people who want to help people like us, because they want to. And you can feel that. These aren't people just wanting to collect a paycheck. These are people who have a calling to help. And I couldn't be more grateful to Epilepsy South Central Ontario for that. And I know my husband feels the exact same way.
we were in a situation where we had no options left. And as she had said, she was in a very dark place. And while she didn't want to be there, she didn't see any other future if we couldn't have some way helped her.
So in all honesty, Epilepsy South Central Ontario very much saved my life that day.
Yeah.
And every day since. So thank you so much to everyone at ESCO and Lindsay and every caretaker that needs better support.
And what it ended up coming to was July of 2019, after almost 2 years of research and testing and everything else, Erika was approved for temporal lobe surgery at Toronto Western Hospital. They removed her right temporal lobe. So she has effectively had almost 10% of her brain removed, which we say that to show just what can be done to help someone. They prepare,
and how magnificent the brain is.
yeah, and its ability to recover. We went through the surgery. There was a moment, and again, they warn us about all the possible outcomes and they give you everything, but there's still that fear. And we took her in the morning for the surgery. We let her go. I mean, my son and I myself were there. We let her go into surgery.
First of all, I've just got to say,
okay.
yeah, go ahead, finish.
Yeah.
It.
So basically, it was an amazing experience. Scary, terrifying, but we got her the surgery she needed, and thankfully, she has been seizure free for almost 2 years now. And we've actually returned to work.
Tell the final story of when you walked into.
Okay. So we didn't know what was going to happen with the surgery. You hope for the best. And the day of the surgery, because of all the anesthetic and everything, I saw her briefly. She was very incoherent. There was a lot of things. And of course, there was a part of me that literally asked myself, is this what the future is going to be? Is she going to be incoherent like this long term? What's going to happen? And then I went home that night with my son. We wrapped everything up. We got to bed. We woke up the next morning and we headed back out to the hospital. And I walk in the room and I can't even see her. She's behind a barricade, but I hear her laughing and joking with the nurse that was working with her, and she was just talking normally and joking with them. And I was like, that was that moment where I'm like, okay, we're going to be okay.
Everything's going to be okay.
And it was great.
And if it wasn't, again,
yeah.
if it wasn't for these little angels in my life that showed up at the right place at the right time, I don't know that I'd be so lucky. I just want to make sure that everybody is entitled to that same level of kindness and compassion that ESCO is granted to us.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.